The JJDL is almost done, which means it's time to start our newest Showdown Draft League, the Frost Battle League. This is going to be a lot different than the JJDL, where all the Pokemon are back. We got Chien-Pao, Spectrier, Iron Valiant, all in this league. A very different perspective than our JJDL season, where we basically banned all of the good Pokemon from the decks in that league. If you're excited for today's video, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more Draft League content. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers this year, and every subscription helps a ton towards hitting that goal. And we've got a lot of great Draft League content coming with this league and the BBL coming soon. So for those of you who don't know, the Frost Battle League is a 5-division league. We're playing in their top division, which is a little bit worrisome. I haven't played at this level in quite some time. I played in quite a few tours recently on various places, but I haven't played in a top level league in a while. So that is going to certainly be a challenge to overcome in this league. Haven't done well in the last few I've played in, so that's my big focus this time, is let's do the best that we can, try to make playoffs and put in a good run. We've got 9 weeks in this league, which means that we're going to do the same style videos that we did before, 3 battles every video, and then playoffs after the fact. As I said in the quick intro, there's going to be a lot of Pokemon that are unbanned. Let me open up the tier list quickly. So we take a look at the tier list that they have. So we have Chien-Pao at like 24, so that's quite a few more than 18. We have Spectrier, Dragapult, Iron Valiant, Great Tusk, and kind of these other Pokemon. So priced a little bit differently than you would expect these other leagues to be at. A lot of leagues topping out, especially in the Wi-Fi leagues that we've done, at 18. You can see this 18 kind of similar to what we had in JJDL. So kind of close idea to what we have here, but a lot more broken stuff than you would expect. I've not played in a league with Spectrier, Chien-Pao, Dragapult in a while, so we'll see how that goes. And then it is going to be free Terra preview on 2 max Terra captains with Terra pricing. I'm not going to get too deep into that. I just want to get quickly into the team, just a quick idea of what the rules are. So you'll see stuff like Chi-Yu is max Terra points, Tornti almost max Terra points, Ogerpon and Wellspring max Terra points. I think we have like 26 that we can spend, so you'll see you can get like a max point and then like a 1-pointer Terra. But enough talking about the draft and the team. Let's actually get into what we picked up. So we end up with a 3rd pick, which means we get Spectrier. I think Dragapult went first and Chien-Pao went second. So I was kind of hoping for Chien-Pao. That Pokemon, I think it's very obscene, but I think Spectrier is very broken to kind of a similar degree. And there's a reason that it's priced at like 23 points in this league. And that's mainly because it is very difficult outside of Terra captains and normal types to actually check this Pokemon. So one of the common ways to check it would be, some sort of defensive dark type. We do have Draining Kiss as an option to break through those, but Draining Kiss is only 50 base power, so you really need Nasty Plot to kind of open those up. But really, it's going to be the Ghost Resist that are going to have to save our opponents, which is the dark typing or the normal typing. So a lot of teams, if they don't have a good normal type, are probably going to be priced into using their Terra Captain to answer Spectrier. But for 23 points, especially at that price point, like if we look at the draft board itself, I was really just looking to get like a Pokemon that was like obscenely in the broken tier here. So something that we definitely haven't used on the channel before. I'm very fortunate that Dragapult went first in that instance, because we've used Dragapult last year in the BBR, which was an obscene Pokemon, but we got access to Chien-Pao or Spectrier. We got Spectrier, which I think might just be the better of the two. I'm not 100% sure. I obviously haven't played with these Pokemon enough to have a good grasp on which is better, but I'm happy to have Spectrier because I think that the dark types and normal types being the only real way to beat these is pretty exploitable with some of the picks that I have coming up here. So when you start with Spectrier, my next goal is to just pair it with this Pokemon defensively and say, how do I handle the Pokemon that are going to be designed to check Spectrier? So our second pick is designed perfectly to kind of handle those ghost and dark types that can be used to check Spectrier, and that is Ting-Lu. Ting-Lu is like one of the best Pokemon that they've added in the new generation, having like the insane stats with 155 HP, 125 defense, and Vessel Ruin to go along with its 80 Spadaf. Like, this Pokemon is the perfect Pokemon to pair with Spectrier. On the defensive side, so like a lot of these Terra Captains, as I said, are going to have to go either Ghost, probably Dark, to handle the Spectrier, or they're going to have defensive, bulky, normal types. Ting-Lu can come in for free on those Pokemon every time, And what's really important about this is getting a reliable spiker that can come up and set up spikes for Spectrier. Spectrier, as great as this Pokemon is, one thing you'll notice as you get into the calcs with it is that you're sometimes relying on entry hazards. Like 145 is good, don't get me wrong, with Nasty Plot and Calm Mind, but for some of these bulkier Pokemon that you have to rely on Training Kiss for, you're going to really need to rely on spikes. So having a really reliable spiker that can come in, allow Spectrier to come in multiple times a game, put pressure, and then get up entry hazards frequently is going to be very powerful. This also has just a lot of other good utility. It's really good against other Terra Captains, and that you have access to Whirlwind primarily to prevent other setup, because as I said, this is a very high-powered league in comparison to what we played against in JJDL. With all of these really powerful Terra Captains and stuff like that, the games are going to be a lot more high-powered than we were used to seeing in the previous videos. So having a Pokemon like this that can blanket check so many different Pokemon that are going to be required to handle the Spectrier is going to be super crucial for that instance. One thing you'll also kind of like as an uncommon use case of Ting-Lu that, doesn't get shown a lot, but is definitely worth looking at, is very fast Ting-Lu. Like 110 is not a joke in terms of offensive output. And Kaz in his videos in the BBR Scramble run that he just had put some great use in with very fast Ting-Lu sets. I would recommend going to check those out in terms of like kind of a different perspective on how to use Ting-Lu. And you're going to see a lot of those ideas probably come up throughout the season. But realistically, like this is just such a good way to pair defensively with the Spectrier. And it wouldn't be a Keegan draft if we didn't get Iron Hands. We have the perfect answer to the Darks and the Ghosts that can be used to check Spectrier. We need a great way to break the normals, and man, I can't think of a better Pokemon to break normals than Iron Hands. Iron Hands is also our first Terra Captain. We have 2 Terra Captains on this team, and Iron Hands is our first one, which might not necessarily seem on the face like the most powerful option. If you look at the tier list, we have like Pokemon like Chi-Yu that can Terra, Torn T, the Greninja, though Greninja really gets forced into Battle Bond a lot in that case. Ogerpon Wellspring's a really, really good one. And then Urshifu Rapid. There's a lot of different, very powerful Terra Captains that we have access to, but I want to go with Iron Hands because, one, getting away from the electric typing can be pretty nice to a certain degree. I think one thing that you'll see, and it happens on a lot of my drafts, is I end up being Earthquake Weak just like by happenstance. I don't think this draft is going to be that one at all, but that's a nice typing to get out of. And this Pokemon, while you'll see me use it defensively most often, you saw me use it very defensively in my BBR runs that I had this Pokemon. It's going to be, and yeah, my last BBR run, very, very defensive, a lot of Assault Vest, Heavy Duty Boots. Terra opens up a lot of offensive capability as well, as you get access to the Fairy typing, which is good. So something like Great Tusk, which is offensively going to come in and be able to handle this Pokemon very effectively outside of Ice Punches, so you're not going to be Terra Ice Punch. Fairy gives you the ability to be more offensive and pressure Pokemon that might be able to have defensively handled you otherwise. So that's going to be nice there. And then defensively, it creates so many interesting scenarios. Like Ghost is an interesting type. I know you have the Spectrier, but it gives you access to like spin blocking for Ting-Lu that you don't have to risk your Spectrier for. For example, what other Terra types? You get access to something like Water. Water's a really, really powerful Terra type as well. So Terra is going to be, give access to something that on the defensive side could be very, very useful, and then opens up some offensive matchups that Iron Hands might have had difficulty with in the past. But goal number 1 of this Pokemon is to break the normal types that will be used to wall our Spectrier. Because where the Dark types, we do have Nasty Plot Training Kiss to push past them a little bit, depending on their sets. We can't push past the normal types, so we definitely need kind of a big threat to handle those, and Iron Hands does that perfectly. And we quickly get here into our second Terra Captain, which is Manaphy, which is a Pokemon that has been, I think people are falling out of favor with this Pokemon a little bit. I know at the start of the metagame where we got it back in was what, DLC 1, I think is when this Pokemon came back. Or when we got access to Tail Glow. I don't remember which. Either way, I think people were really scared of Terra Manaphy with Tail Glow. But you can see here, I was able to get Iron Hands Terra and Manaphy Terra within the 26 Terra tax price point. So you might be thinking, well, okay, interesting. So it looks like we've kind of really come down on Terra Manaphy, and we kind of have. And one of the things I'm doing with this team is, this team has been very balanced so far. And I know balance is not really the way to build in Generation 9. For the most part, offense is going to be kind of the name of the game. And that's just kind of like, kind of what you have to do. But I think Terra Manaphy is a good way to actually kind of bridge the gap between those balanced and really offensive ideas, and that Terra on a Pokemon like this does enable the Tail Glow sets. And while like 100s across the board is not as powerful as it used to be by any means, like 100 speed is getting outsped pretty frequently nowadays, I do think the Terra opens up a lot offensively for this Pokemon. And the last time I took this Pokemon to a championship, I don't want to date myself and say it happened in 2016, but there's a good possibility that I was playing Draft League in 2016. This Pokemon is just a really, really good kind of balanced style Pokemon, in the sense that it has all the utility that you would want in a balanced Pokemon in terms of something like U-Turn. I guess it has Flip Turn as well. I didn't think about that too much, but you have stuff like Scald, which is very, very powerful for that knockoff. You have access to screens if you're John Jr. You got Haze, and then not Heart Swap. What is it? Take Heart or whatever it's called. What's the broken? Yeah, Take Heart is the Calm Mind with the Cure status, which can be useful as well. So Terra as a defensive typing, as a defensive application, has become very, very critical in these free Terra preview metagames. So it's nice to have a Pokemon like this with the 100s across the board and a lot of tools like Knockoff and Scald to pressure that, while also having the kind of the Tail Glow Terra angle, where you can really, really punish teams that don't have good answers to Manaphy, which most of them do at this point. Terra can sometimes open up cases where they just don't anymore. So this team, as I said, it's very balanced so far, and that's really how I prefer to play Pokemon. And that's, a lot of the reason that you saw the decisions I made in the JJDL tier list was to make balance a more applicable style. This type of metagame is not going to be as conducive to that, but that's still kind of how I play, and I think this Pokemon allows me to play into that while also forcing the threat of Terra offense with Tail Glow. Another thing that's like important to know if you've watched me a lot is I draft a lot of repeat Pokemon. I'm really comfortable with what I like, and Uxie is like a perfect example of that. One thing that's really nice about Uxie here is it gives me a good way to enable some of the cheaper defensive Pokemon I had to go with. So if you look at the Terra board here, we have like 110 points, I think. If I look at the rules, we had 110, 115. But a lot of the good Pokemon are really inflated in terms of pricing in this. So like our top tier was like 23. We had to spend extra on like a bunch of Terra Pokemon and such. So that means when you get to the lower levels, you're going to have to kind of draft kind of some flawed Pokemon. And we'll get into that in a second. I think it's a really interesting topic. But Uxie is a great way to kind of patch up a lot of defensive weaknesses. 130 is very good on the defensive side with 75 HP, and this gives you a really good way to kind of counteract the fighting weaknesses for Ting-Lu. Gives a really good ground resist that counteracts the Iron Hands. It has overlapping weaknesses with Spectrier, but those overlapping weaknesses are really managed well by Iron Hands and Ting-Lu. And this is just a really, really solid... I named this Pokemon Draymond in my first game because it kind of operates in that way, and that it's the perfect facilitator in these type of teams, that it can set up hazards, it can pressure items, it can pressure offensive threats with Thunder Wave, which is super important to enable something like Iron Hands to come in and outspeed and deal damage. You have something like Encore to punish setup. Like, this Pokemon is the perfect utility Pokemon, the perfect kind of glue to every team, and that it'll always have a role in each game that it can take advantage of to enable all of its other teams. And that, I mean, that's kind of the balance idea in general, but this is going to allow me to pick some potentially what you might consider flawed Pokemon in the next couple of rounds. I'm going to talk about these next two picks in tandem here. I've got Florges and Registeel next, two very, very cheap defensive Pokemon, but they both really function well within their role. And that's why I stress the pick of Uxie to be so important to enable something like the Florges, in that it does a really good job with the Ting-Lu and the Iron Hands in managing the physical defensive roles in terms of switching in and taking hits, where Florges here is very much a complete lockdown in terms of special defensive threats. And then Moonblast is just such a powerful move, especially where we have quite a few powerful dragons to manage, not in this format specifically, we'll talk about that in a couple weeks, but just being a very good, cheap budget fairy in that aspect. There's not a lot of really good fairies in Generation 9, and that's one thing you really have to consider when making these picks, is that you're sometimes going to have to drop these Pokemon like Florges to operate in that role. And that's why getting these really good physically defensive Pokemon like Uxie is just so important to enable that. Because you want to put your Pokemon in a role that they can succeed. And that's why I want to talk about Registeel as well at the same time, is that Registeel is really just a lockdown answer for a lot of these fairy types, a lot of fairy types and a lot of special attackers that might be very relevant in matchups. And you might be thinking, it's like, well, these Pokemon don't really fit in terms of the offensive style of Pokemon that we play nowadays. So why would you be looking to draft them? Well, the way that I look at it is we need cheap options to fill it defensively. And even though these Pokemon have flaws, no Seismic Toss, no Toxic on Registeel, for example, Florges really bad on, checking defensive Pokemon, is draft, especially in like 9 to 11 Mon. In 8 Mon, this is obviously going to be very, very different with the limited resources that you have. But I think building teams that not every Pokemon has to be, in a sense, perfect. These Pokemon have inherent flaws to them. That is true. But the example I use whenever it gets brought up is you wouldn't put Clint Capella, if you're a basketball fan, as your three-point shooter. You wouldn't have him sitting on the perimeter in the corner taking three-point shots. And that's how I look at these Pokemon, in that you wouldn't have Florges as like a physically defensive check, using it as a fairy, a fighting resist in that sense. It's going to get blown back. That's why you draft stuff like Uxie on your team. Registeel, really good at shutting down special defensive Pokemon and some physical defensive stuff like normals, for example. I can use Iron Defense Body Press to take advantage of those Pokemon. Where it's weak, is breaking through some of that bulk that's not necessarily weak to Heavy Slam or Body Press. It can sometimes get set up on with Substitute, though it kind of could anyway, even though it lost Toxic. Those instances, Uxie does a really good job of punishing that with stuff like Encore. Iron Hands does a good job offensively punishing those Pokemon that might take advantage of Registeel on the defensive side to start setting up. When you get into these leagues where you have so many points, you're going to have to inherently draft Pokemon that are flawed. You have to build teams that can account for those flaws. And that's why I think team building, especially in 9 to 11, you have to accept some of these type of Pokemon on your team that have the flaws and make sure you draft to account for them. So instead of having Clint Capella your 3-point slot, as your 3-point shooter, you have someone like a Tyler Hero or someone, I don't know. I couldn't think of a 3-point shooter that Capella's played for that's like not hard and obviously insane. But you got to have Pokemon that fill those roles to enable these Pokemon to do what they do best. And that's what Florges and Registeel are doing on this team. Now, the problem with this team, if you're speaking objectively from a Generation 9 perspective, is this is a balanced team, to say the least. There is not a lot of offensive... it's lacking some offensive firepower here for sure. And so where I go to kind of deal with that is I go to Lycanroc. And Lycanroc fits in the 110 speed tier. We didn't have that yet, which is good. It gives me another rocker. I have 5 stealth rockers on this team, which is a little bit abnormal for me. I'm someone who would generally prefer spikes as a hazard, even though rocks are easier to come by. But this has a few good things to know. One is at speed tier. It's got 117 attack, which is not a lot. This is very much an offensive threat, to say the least. But it's got good priority in Accelerock. It's got some good utility. It's got counter. We can use that to our advantage. It's got taunt, really good lead potential here on this Pokemon, but mainly we don't have anything in that speed tier, and we need to start threatening Pokemon at that 110. We have good ways to get this Pokemon in, despite it, with it being frail. We have Uxie, Manaphy, Iron Hands, and Florges, all Pokemon with the ability to take a hit and switch out with momentum to enable a free switch into our Lycanroc. So that's going to be super useful in the matchups where it is applicable. But mainly this Pokemon is here to be a 110 speed tier, fit that role, use its priority to good effect, and be a great lead on this team. And then the final Pokemon on this team is Gothorita. Now, I've drafted a lot of last pick Gothoritas in my day, and what I really like about Gothorita here is it's going to be able to either, one, actually fulfill its role to come and trap things and remove normal types for the Spectrier, or it's actually going to force a lot of Shed Shell prep, which will be really crucial if I don't bring it even in that matchup. The threat of Gothorita is not as is not as strong as I maybe would like it to be. I think people kind of disrespect this Pokemon in general, not necessarily for bad reasons, to be fair. It's not the best Pokemon. But sometimes these defensive Pokemon are you're gonna want to take advantage of them with something like a Gothorita, or force a Shed Shell on something that might want to run Eviolite. So if you look at those, lower tier normals that might want to run Eviolite, Gothorita puts them in a tough position to actually do that in these matchups. And that's basically what I'm going here for 3 points. You're not going to get a lot of value out of your 3 points all of the time, but this is a good place to do it. And that is the team that I've drafted for the Frost Battle League. It's very much a balanced team, which I think is not as conducive to how Gen 9 plays, but it's what I'm comfortable with. And when I look at how do I give myself the best chance to succeed, it's playing in a way I'm comfortable with, and not going all guns blazing offensively. And I think that's kind of what you have to do a little bit to enable Spectrier, is you want to get opportunities for Ting-Lu to come in and set up hazards, Iron Hands to break the normals, and then use Manaphy as kind of that secondary, very powerful offensive threat, as well as Terra Iron Hands, hey, that can do that too. So that is the team. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. As I said, we'll be uploading this league in 3 parts in the regular season, week 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 9, how we did for the JJDL, and then a playoff video after the fact. That'll be uploaded during BBL as well. So all of that to look forward to. As I said, yeah, that is the team. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I will see you all next time. And as always, have a wonderful day.